Hazel Linden stood at the front of the church in Bonham in her mother's made-over wedding dress for 40 minutes past the hour, with the whole town watching and the preacher shifting his feet, before the note from Dorsey Lott was finally carried up the aisle and put into her hands, and she read in 5 lines in front of everyone that she would not be married that day nor any day, because Dorsey had thought better of it. He did not even come to say it. That was the part the town would talk of longest. He sent a boy with a note. Dorsey Lott had got a better offer, the banker's daughter over in Coldwater, it came out soon enough, with a dowry attached, and rather than face the girl he'd courted a year and promised to wed, he had let her dress and stand and wait at the altar before all of Bonham, and then jilted her by messenger, so that Hazel Linden's humiliation was as public and as total as a humiliation can be. She stood there with the note in her hand and the whole church staring, and she did the only thing left to her with any dignity in it, which was to fold the note small and lift her chin, and walk back down the aisle alone and out the door past every pitying and gloating face in town and keep walking. And then there was nowhere to walk to. For the cruelty of it was that Hazel had nothing to fall back on. Her father had been a beekeeper, a gentle man who'd kept bees and sold honey and taught his daughter everything he knew of the small humming kingdom. And when he died the winter before, his debts had taken the bees and the cottage both, and Hazel had been left an orphan of 24 with no home and no people, and Dorsey Lott's proposal had been the one solid ground under her feet. A marriage, a place, a future. She had pinned everything to it because it was all she had. And now Dorsey had pulled it out from under her in front of the town, and she had no father, no home, no bees, no position, and a public ruin on top of it that would close every respectable door in Bonham, because a jilted woman, by the strange arithmetic of small towns, is somehow held to share the shame of the man who jilted her. She walked out past the edge of town and sat down on a stone by the road in her wedding dress, because she had run clean out of places to go, and she had not let herself cry in the church, and she was not going to start now on a public road. So she just sat, dry-eyed and emptied, and waited for she did not know what. Micah Hart found her there. He was a rancher of about 34 with a place and an orchard north of Bonham, a quiet, unmarried, plain-spoken man, and he had been at the wedding, not a friend of Dorsey's, but he'd known Hazel's father, had bought the old man's honey for years, and admired both the bees and the gentle gift the daughter so plainly had with them. And he had watched the whole ugly thing from a back pew with a slow anger building. He'd seen her walk out. He'd given her a while, and then he'd come looking, because a man who'd watched that could not just go home. And he'd found her on the stone by the road in her wedding dress, with the look of a person at the absolute end of her road. He did not make a speech. He took off his hat and stood a respectful distance off and asked her the only question that mattered. "Miss Linden, it's no business of mine, and I'll go if you say. But it's coming on evening, and I find I can't ride off and leave you sitting on a rock in your wedding dress without asking. Do you have anywhere to go?" Hazel looked up at the plain rancher and found she could not even manage a polite lie, being far too far gone for one. "No," she said, "I haven't. My father's dead, and the bees are sold, and there's no home to go to, and no place in this town will have me now. After that. I have nowhere to go, Mr. Hart, and I've been sitting here trying to think what a person does when they've run out of places, and I haven't worked it out yet." She said it flat, past shame, past everything. And Micah Hart looked at her a long, steady moment and said the thing that turned her whole life. "Now you do." She stared at him. He went on, plain and quick, before she could refuse out of pride. "I've an orchard my father planted that hasn't borne a decent crop in 6 years, apples and a few peach, gone near barren, and nobody could ever tell me why. And I knew your father, and bought his honey, and I watched you with his hives when you were a girl, and you'd a gift for it past anything I've seen. I've been meaning to get bees for that orchard for years and never knew how to start. So this isn't charity, Miss Linden, and I'll thank you not to take it as such. It's a fair offer of work. Come keep bees on my place. Bring them back, build them up, set them in that orchard. There's a good room with a lock and a wage and your own bees again, and honest work that's yours. You asked have you anywhere to go. You do now. If you want it, you've got an orchard that needs you, which is more than this town deserves to keep. He put his hat back on. I'll not press. But the offer's real, and it stands whether you take it today or think on it a week. Hazel Linden, who had stood up that morning to marry one man and been publicly discarded, got up off the stone by the road that evening and went to keep bees for another. Because the alternative was the dark and the ditch, and because something in the plain, steady way he'd said now you do had reached the part of her that had given up and told it to get up. The first night in the room with the lock, Hazel Linden lay awake a long while, not from fear, but from the strangeness of a door that was hers to shut and a morning ahead with work in it that was neither drudgery nor charity but her own true craft, waiting. She had gone to sleep 2 nights before as a bride-to-be, woken a jilted woman, and gone to sleep again as a beekeeper with a wage, and somewhere in that hard arithmetic she found, to her own surprise, that the last of the 3 was the only one that had ever felt like solid ground beneath her feet. She did not heal fast, but the bees healed her faster than anything else could have. For Micah Hart had not exaggerated her gift. Hazel Linden among bees was a different creature than Hazel Linden among people. Sure, calm, unhurried, unafraid. Her hands moving through the hives while the bees crawled over her wrists and never stung. A gift her father had seen and named, and that the world had never since had any use for. She got 2 failing skeps from a farmer who'd given up on them, nursed them back, split them, built them up through the summer, and set the strong new hives among the trees of Micah's barren orchard, and the next spring, the orchard that had not borne in 6 years foamed into bloom and hummed with her bees from dawn to dark. Every blossom worked and pollinated as it had not been since the wild bees thinned. And that autumn Micah Hart's dead orchard bore so heavy with apples that the limbs had to be propped. The first true crop in 6 years. And the reason was the small humming kingdom Hazel had set beneath the trees. The orchard had not been sick, it had only been lonely for bees. And Hazel Linden, who knew exactly what it was to go barren for lack of the right small daily attention, had given it the one thing it needed and watched it bloom, and understood she was watching something about herself. She changed that first summer the way the orchard did. The flinching dignity she had walked out of the church with eased into something steadier, she who had pinned her whole worth to a man's willingness to marry her learned, frame by frame and hive by hive, that her worth had never been his to grant or take. It had been in her hands all along, in the gift her father gave her, waiting only for someone to need it. Micah needed it, and said so plainly and often, and paid her fare, and asked her judgment on the trees as though it weighed more than his own, which in the matter of bees it did. A woman who has been thrown away in public does not soon believe she is worth keeping. But it is hard to go on disbelieving it with both hands full of work that only you can do. And a quiet man across the orchard treating your opinion like weather he'd best heed. The honey came too, dark orchard honey that sold faster than she could put it up, and between the fruit and the honey Micah Hart's place did better that year than it had in a decade, and he was too honest a man to pretend he didn't know exactly who'd done it. Micah told her about the orchard one evening, why it mattered past the money. His father had planted it the year Micah was born, every tree set by hand, and meant it for a house full of family that never quite came, and it died with it going barren. So that Micah had kept it more from love than sense, a green monument to a dead man's hopes. Hazel told him in turn about her own father and his bees, the gentle humming years of her girlhood, the debts that took it all. And they discovered, the two of them, that they were each the last keeper of a dead father's dream gone fallow, his orchard, her bees, and that, set together at last, the two fallow dreams had made between them one living thing that fed them both. Neither said aloud what that seemed to mean, but Micah took to leaving a jar of the first honey on her windowsill of a morning without a word, and Hazel took to saving him the best apple off the propped trees, and the place hummed and healed the two of them by inches along with itself. Mrs. Gantry drove out to speak of appearances. A jilted girl living right out at a bachelor's place, the two of them alone with the bees and the talk, and had Hazel no care for how it looked, ruined once already as she was. Hazel, lifting a frame heavy with comb, did not hurry. "Mrs. Gantry," she said, "I stood up in front of the whole town in my wedding dress and was thrown over by a coward with a note. And the town's been clucking how that looks ever since, as though I'd done the jilting. So I've learned what the towns care for how things look is worth, which is exactly nothing, and I've none of my own to spend on it. Mr. Hart gave me work and a locked door and my bees back when this town gave me pity and gossip. I know which I'd rather have. Mind the hive there, she's a touch cross in the afternoon, and she can tell, I think, who means well." Mrs. Gantry left rather quickly. The bees saw her out. The turn came at the first harvest under the propped and groaning trees. Micah had taken to working the orchard alongside her of an evening, and the two of them stood under the loaded apple trees in the gold light, and Micah said, "In his plain way, 6 years I looked at these trees and thought they were dying, and there wasn't a thing to be done. Turned out they only needed what they'd lost put back. I think on that a good deal lately." He picked an apple and turned it in his hand. "I was content enough alone, the way the orchard was content enough barren, which is to say, not at all, only used to it. And then you came and set something humming under everything, and I find I can't go back to how it was, no more than these trees could." He didn't look at her, he looked at the apple. I'm saying it poorly. I'm a poor hand at it. "But you didn't only fix my orchard. Hazel Linden stood under the heavy trees with the bees going home in the last light, and did not say anything either. But she took the apple out of his hand and bit it, which was as much as she could manage, and it was enough, and the two of them stood there in the hum and the gold, and let the unsaid thing ripen, which suited them both. Dorsey Lott came back when he heard. His banker's daughter had not, in the end, married him. The dowry had come with conditions Dorsey hadn't the character to meet, and the match had fallen through. And Dorsey Lott had spent a sour year watching his discarded bride become, of all the galling things, a woman of note in the county, the beekeeper who'd raised Hart's famous orchard, talked of and respected and, worst of all, happy. And Dorsey, whose vanity could not abide that the girl he'd thrown away had landed better than he had, came out to Bonham at harvest time, when half the county was at Hart's place buying fruit and honey, and made his play in front of all of them, which was exactly his mistake. He came up to Hazel at her honey table, all charm, loud enough for the crowd, and said he'd been a fool, that he'd never stopped thinking of her, that he'd come to make it right and take her back, that a beekeeper girl belonged with a man of prospects like himself and not buried on a hardscrabble orchard, and he held out his hand to her before the whole watching county as though he were the answer to a prayer. Hazel Linden looked at the hand, and then at the man, and did not take it. "Dorsey," she said, clear enough for the crowd that had gone quiet, "you left me standing in a church in my wedding dress in front of this whole town, and sent a boy with a note because you hadn't the spine to come yourself. You traded me for a dowry that wouldn't have you. And now you've heard I'm happy and doing well, and you find you can't stand it. So you've come to take it back. Not because you want me, you never wanted me, but because you can't bear that I landed soft after you threw me down hard." She set her hands flat on her honey table. "You asked once, by note, to be rid of me, and I've been grateful for it every day since, because being jilted by you is the best thing that ever happened to me. It's how I came to a man who found me on a rock by the road and asked did I have anywhere to go, and meant it. You've no claim on me, Dorsey Lot. You signed it away with a note and a boy. There's the road. I'd take it before my bees take an interest in you. They're particular about who comes round the honey, and they can smell a thing gone bad." The county laughed, not at her, for once in Bonham's history, but at him. And Dorsey Lot, who had come to perform a triumph and instead been handed his own jilting in kind before the whole watching crowd, went red and then white, and got on his horse and left, and was not much spoken of in that country again, except as a cautionary tale. And Micah Hart, who had come up quiet behind Hazel midway through and stood at her shoulder without a word the whole time, letting her fight her own fight, because he'd learned she could, only said, "When Dorsey was gone, you didn't need me for that at all." "No," Hazel said, "but I was glad you were there. There's a difference. I spent my whole life needing someone to stand between me and the next bad thing. It's a finer feeling to fight your own and just be glad of the company at your back." Micah Hart asked her to marry him that evening, properly this time, under the apple trees. "I asked you once, did you have anywhere to go?" he said, "and I told you now you do, and I meant a room and a wage and your bees back, because that was all I had the right to offer a woman I'd just watched get her heart broken in public. I've been a year wanting to offer the rest and not daring, for fear you'd think it was the deal all along, which it never was. But you faced Dorsey Lot down today without a hand from me, and chose this place with your eyes open and no one to fall back on, so now I can ask and you can answer free." He took her hands, sticky with honey as they were. "I don't want a beekeeper for my orchard, Hazel. I want you for my life. Marry me. Not because you've nowhere to go. You could keep bees anywhere in this county, and they'd line up to have you. Marry me because there's an orchard here that's yours and a man who's been yours since about the day he found you on that rock. And because I'd like the now you do to be permanent and to mean a home and not just a hive." He almost smiled. "You bit my apple under these trees and didn't give it back. I've been hoping ever since that meant what I thought it did." Hazel Linden, who had stood at an altar once and been handed a note, looked at the plain orchardman, asking her plainly under the trees her bees had saved, and found the answer was the easiest thing she'd ever said. "I stood up to be married once," she said, "and a coward sent a boy. And then a decent man rode out and found me on a rock and asked did I have anywhere to go, and gave me bees and a door that locks and a year to remember I was worth something, and never once pressed for a thing. You want to know what the bitten apple meant? Micah Hart. It meant yes. It's meant yes since the harvest. Ask me proper and hear it." He asked her proper. She said yes, under the loaded trees, with the bees going home around them both. They married that autumn, and Hazel Hart kept the bees and the orchard famous in 3 counties for the rest of her life. The dark orchard honey and heavy fruit. And she trained up every motherless or castaway girl the county threw her way in the gentle art of the hives, because she had not forgotten what it was to have a gift and no place to use it. She and Micah raised a houseful of children under the apple trees, and Hazel told them, when they were old enough to understand it, the story of the wedding she didn't have and the rock by the road and the man who asked the right question. Not as a sad story, but as the truest piece of luck in her life. For, as she'd say, the worst day she ever stood through turned out to be the road to the best. And a girl jilted by a fool was only a girl set free to be found by a good man, if she could just sit on the rock long enough to be found. And that was the story of Hazel Linden, the bride left waiting at the altar with nowhere on earth to go, who was asked one plain question by an orchardman on a country road and answered no, and heard him say, "Now you do," and found at the end of it her bees, her worth, and a home she was never once jilted from. If this one warmed you tonight, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I hope it found you well. I'll see you in the next one.